Hello, how's everyone doing today? We'll go ahead and get started while we'll wait for people to trickle in. But yeah, so today is actually more of a typical day. Yesterday was just day one stuff and setup stuff, so that's why it's a little bit longer than normal. So yesterday, all of the setup stuff, you only need to do that once per machine. So if you get a new computer or anything like that, you would need to run through those steps again inside of that new computer. But that should be all good for the rest of the course. There are a few more things that we need to install a little bit later on, but those are the main ones just to help us get started. So those are just those initial setup steps that we have there. So today and the rest of the week and a little bit of next week, we're actually going to go into kind of the fundamentals of coding, and we are doing it within Ruby. And not only that, we are also going to be using it in the application and then also kind of prepare you for the homework assignment for that there. So that's kind of what is game plan for this week is that we are mainly going to go into Ruby and is more for lecture. And then we'll talk about the project more on Thursday. Any questions about the schedule? Awesome. So just a reminder, all of the videos are inside of the Neo LMS in the modules. So yesterday's video is because it's day one, that's the topic. It'll be inside of the day one module. And then that would be in the day one video right here. So that's where the video of the recording yesterday is at. It's that little section there. And then today we are also going to have another one. And that one will be inside of the bottom one here for the files for Ruby fundamental files there. So that's where you can find this future video there. So again, just note that all of the videos is going to be inside of each individual topic or the module, and you can access them through there. And they do take a sec, so it's usually in the next morning is where you can definitely watch the video there. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started with some lectures. There are going to be some lectures I'm going to give you where you don't need to take notes because you already have this inside of your Neo LMS. So this one will be available to you inside of the debug section here. So let me go ahead and share my screen. We'll go ahead and talk about this topic before we get started. Can everyone see my screen and my cursor? Sweet. Awesome, awesome. So today we are actually, instead of starting us off into the thick of it within coding, we're actually going to be talking about debugging because a lot of stuff happened when you are going to get started of coding is that you are going to be hitting errors as well as some weird things that you won't be encountering. We don't live in a perfect world where we write perfect code and everything just works. We oftentimes would write something incorrectly or something went wrong. So we need to know how to handle that problem. So that's kind of the purpose of this is that this is kind of help to prepare you of what to do in those situations. And also, right now you have me and Michael to kind of help you out within the debugging process, especially when you have errors or if you have something going wrong, you have one of us to help you out. But later on, after you graduate, you actually will be a little bit more on your own. We won't always be available for you to ask questions. And it is something that you would need to develop some good habits for you to kind of work on so you can kind of fix those problems yourself. And we'll go over some of those techniques and some common errors and all of that as well. So essentially what debugging is to try to find and solve errors. And this is very different than refactoring. Refactoring means that you are already coded and you just need to fix your code so it's a little bit more better in performance or you are kind of cutting back on the code. That's totally different. That's like something else. This is more about if you have errors, then you would need to go ahead and try to solve those errors inside of your individual either code or program or whatever you need to do. And I guarantee you 100% of the time you will encounter a bug or multiple bugs at once. Yesterday, some of you already encountered some of those bugs already. And we'll kind of learn how to read those bugs and know what to do in case those things happen. And this kind of goes back in time, and this isn't something new. It actually has been around for a while. And this goes back to someone called Grace Hopper. And Grace Hopper is one of the first women computer science that worked in Harvard, and she worked on one of the very first computers out there, and way back in the 1940s, right? So she was actually, if you take a look at her bio, she was actually in the Navy, was really good inside of her school, and then eventually worked inside of the computer science and became a lead computer scientist inside of that team. But one of the things kind of was a little bit weird during the September 9th of 1947. And this was back then when computers were huge machines, right? Like right now, your computer is what you see before you with a laptop or something that can fit inside of your pocket, like a cell phone. But back then, and this goes back to like 70 or 60 years ago, these are what computers would look like, right? You have a bunch of knobs and buttons and sensors and wires just everywhere. And these computers are huge. You can't fit a computer in every single household. Usually only schools and certain military stuff and government stuff, they only have access to these computers because of how big they are. They would take up whole buildings and whole floors of everything that is needed for a computer. And this is only one computer, right? So this is a single computer that all of this stuff is for. So with this, inside of actually one of these modules is a relay cube. They actually found some sort of a glitch when they were trying to do some of their calculations. And they try to trace it back into one of these machines. And inside of this machine, this is what they found to kind of trace back that particular glitch inside of their computation. And here's what they found. So eventually they trace it all the way back to a relay. And it was a actual bug or a dead moth that died inside of the relay and kind of have electric interference within those wires that it was in there. And inside of that, they kind of put into their notes and kind of revolutionized the term bug forever, right? So they actually had a bug that actually caused an error with that there. Not only that, we also have earlier bugs, even more than 100 years ago, where in 1892, inside of the electrical dictionary, they noted that any fault or trouble in the working or electric apparatus, they always will be considered a bug there. And even back in Thomas Edison time in 73, he invented something called a bug trap that isolates false telegraphs and kind of started the term bug from there. And then even way before then in the 1840s, one of the most arguably the very first computer scientist, Ida Lovelace, she actually first noted of how human software actually can contain errors. So bugs aren't something new. It's always been there. It's always been around. It's just that it's something for us to kind of take a lead on and take a look at. And you might be wondering if Ida Lovelace is related to the Happy Feet Lovelace, but unfortunately they are not. This is more of a depiction of it. This is way back when Apple was just a seed and all of that. So this is more about how she thought back then. And even with all of her thinking, everyone thought that she was crazy because back then it was a different time period and people thought that anything that was man-made is always going to be perfect and nothing will contain any errors or anything like that. And they really ridicule her because of the way that she's thinking, but the way that she's thinking is way ahead from her time for sure. And here is Thomas Edison with his famous bug trap that also kind of covers some false telegrams. And then this is going to be the version of the dictionary that also listed out what a bug is. And the more important thing is not what a bug is, it's more important to know how to fix it. So with this, we are going to learn a few different methodologies to kind of help you work through bugs. Because again, when you have a bug right now, you might be instinctively kind of raising your hand or asking for help, like, hey, you have an error, I need someone to help us out. So instead of doing that, we actually have kind of a process for you to kind of work through before we get to that point. And it kind of breaks down the word debug into an acronym for us to kind of use. So what the D is double check, E is errors, B is breaks, U is utilize, and G is Google. So these don't have any particular order. These are just some of the steps that you can do to kind of help you to fix the error that it is that you are having. So let's just break them down one by one. So with the double check, the thing is that most of the time when you have errors, it could be something that is wrong. You might be having like a semicolon where you're not supposed to, or a quote, or you may have copy and pasted something incorrectly. So it's always good to double check for the working code what's something that isn't working and make sure that all of that is working from there. So that's what the D is to double check your code to a working one and making sure that that matches up. The errors is that most of the errors that we will encounter, they will actually tell you what is going on or what's wrong or why it's giving us an error. So with that can kind of point us to the right direction of where to look and kind of see where the error is as well as what the error is. And there are a lot of common errors that you'll get to see, especially in the next few days. I'll be making some common errors for you to see, and you can kind of see what we can do with them when those happen there. So that's what the E is to kind of look at the errors and kind of see where it is, as well as what the error is giving us. This one is breaks. So just take a small break to clear up your mind and revisit it with a new view. Oftentimes when you are looking at an error for a long time, or if you're working on a project that is super long, you just need a super small break to kind of clear out your mind, do something outside of coding, or just go for a walk, or just to kind of clear up your head. And then when you come back, you can kind of find it a little bit better. So that is breaks. And then U is utilize, and this is to utilize all of your resources, right? So utilize your classmates, your lecture notes inside of Neo, Slack, because I am going to Slack out everything out. So definitely take a look at that. And then we'll also talk about these dev tools that we will be using as well. So those dev tools, depending on what we are working in, I'll kind of show you how to use those tools to kind of dive into errors much more deeply. And that is what the U stands for, is to utilize your resources. And then lastly, we have Google. So Googling is easier said than done. Sometimes you can just Google the error. And with that can give you some suggestions, or it can point you into a totally different error. So the main thing is that if you want to Google something, make sure you name the language it is that you're working on. So for example, if you have an error, make sure you put Ruby in front of that error. So that way it's not doing it within Python or PHP or anything like that. That will go ahead and kind of narrow down the search results from there. And then try to explain it in one line. If you want to find something, like let's say, how do I move this box over to the left, right? So try to do like a one-liner search for that instead of explaining it in a huge paragraph. So we'll go ahead and kind of work through how to Google stuff and what is a good Googling technique and everything like that. So yeah, so those are all of the steps. And be sure to do some of these steps next time you have errors. So that way you can develop good habits. So that way you can kind of use that to your advantage of all of the items that you have there. And the chain of commands for question is to do it yourself first and make sure that you are doing the debugging steps. So double checking yourself, look at the error, utilizing your resource, and maybe do some Googling. And after like 10-15 minutes, you still can't figure it out, ask Slack or ask one of your classmates to see if they have the error or not. And in the most likely cases or not, you will have to have the same error as another person, because that is a very rare instance that you only are the only person to have that error. So multiple people will have that same error, but at different times. So make sure that you are asking other people to see if that they've seen something like that before, so they can give you some possible solutions. After that, then you are going to go ahead, and if you still can't figure it out after 10, 15 minutes, then we are going to go into asking the TA or the instructor of what it is that is going on from there. So that's kind of the chain of commands for when you are encountering a bug, is to kind of try to figure it out yourself, ask your neighbor, and then eventually ask one of us here. Again, we are just doing good habits there. If you have questions, and this goes for like clarification questions, or if you have any sort of like if I were to teach something and you are a little bit confused about that topic or want me to repeat something, then you can more likely just ask me, or you can just Slack me that, and I'm more than welcome to clear things up with you there. So those are more for questions, but if you have errors, try to work through those until you really get stuck. So those are the debugging steps. Any question about those before I'll show you where you can get these steps from? Okay, so you can find that here inside of the individual lecture, or you can download it as a PDF. But here is something of what we'll be using a lot throughout the course, is the DPL sheets here. So I'm actually going to Slack this out. And again, during lecture, I will be slacking a lot of items out. So be sure to have this in handy on your computer here. So with this, I am also going to pin it. So let me go ahead and pin the item. So pin to channel. So again, if you want to see anything that is pinned, is up here over on this top left-hand side middle portion. And this is where you can find that day one slides with all of those dates that we have, and then the DPL sheets here. So again, be sure to save that and also bookmark that, because we'll be using that a lot inside of the course. So with the DPL sheets, this has that debugging methodology that I just mentioned above. And it also has a bunch of other reference sheets that we'll go over throughout the next few weeks, right? So we'll go over some Get stuff, some Rails stuff, React stuff, and production stuff. So those are all going to be on this particular page, and I'll be referencing them here and there as well. So it's good to have this page handy, especially for this debugging section. So be sure to bookmark this as well as to save it somewhere, and always pull it up, especially when you need it there. Okay, so yeah, you can look ahead, but these other reference sheets might not make sense yet, just because we haven't talked about those topics yet. So yeah, you can look at the Get and the Rails and production stuff, but those will make a lot more sense later on. So that is the debugging sheets there. Sweet. Yeah, awesome. So now let's actually go into the meat and potatoes of it. And we're actually going to be talking about the big picture and then kind of breaking it down into small manageable parts. So right here is a whole roadmap of what it is that we are going to be going over and what it is that you'll be learning to achieve your end goal. As the end of this course, you will be a full stack developer. And what that entails is that you will be doing some front end and back end items. And essentially what front end is that it is everything that what the user sees and interacts with. And back end is more of the data side and kind of get those background processes working. So we'll be doing both of those to be inside of a full stack developer. So instead of doing that all in one go, we're actually going to do it in small chunks. So over on the front end side, we are going to be learning JavaScript as well as ES6, which is the newer version of JavaScript. And we are going to then go into React. And that's what we are going to be using for our front end is the React.js. So before we do that, we need to learn a little bit of JavaScript first, and then we can hop into React so we can handle the front end. The back end, we will be using Ruby for our main language for the back end, as well as any fundamental items that we have that will also be inside of Ruby. And those stuff will be transferable into other languages like JavaScript. So the stuff that I'm teaching you today, tomorrow, and next week, that will also apply to JavaScript. It's just written a little bit differently. So that's something that we'll be going over. With Ruby, we are going to be using Ruby on Rails to handle our backend, and then our SQL is going to handle our database. So that's where we are going to store all of the items that we are going to be retrieving from the user is what SQL. So both of those will make up our backend. And then later on in the next few weeks, we are then going to combine both the front end and the backend together. That way we can have a full stack environment, and we'll be having React handle the front end and Rails handling the back end, with SQL handling the database portion. So that's kind of what we are going to go over and kind of reach our end goal there. So today we're actually going to get started with Ruby and kind of moving forward from there and going one step at a time. But any questions about the big picture here? Awesome. So let's go ahead and get started. So let me see here. Let's do this first, and then we'll go into the content. Let's have everyone open up their iTerm as well as, just their iTerm for now. So with your iTerm, we are going to go over some of the basis of the command line to navigate within the terminal, because we'll be doing this on a daily basis. So it's a little bit scary at first, but then you'll get comfortable with it a little bit later on. So does anyone know the command to know where you are at inside of the terminal? So if I want to know where it is, go ahead, Brian.
PWD.
Yeah, PWD. Do you agree, Hayden? I think.
Yeah.
Sweet. So PWD means print working directory. So if you don't know where you are, you can just run that, and that will kind of show you where you are inside of your computer. So essentially, inside of our computer is made up of multiple files and folders. So technically, we are inside of your user folder that we are going to be going in. But we're not going to work inside of this particular folder just because it's a little bit harder for us to have access to and to kind of go out of the way to finding stuff in there. So we need to go into somewhere like our documents or our desktop and make a project directory. And that's where all of our stuff will be is inside of that project directory. And how the course will go is that inside of we'll just call it like a DPL folder. Inside of the DPL folder, that's where we are going to create individual folders for all of your projects and all of your lessons. So that way we can navigate and go to them all in one spot. So anytime that I mention directories, just know that I just mean folders, and that's what they essentially mean. So if I want to kind of list out everything inside of this current directory, what is that command?
ls.
Yeah, ls. So ls is to list out everything inside of your current directory. So here you'll see you have like documents, desktop, etc. With everything there. If you don't see this, you might be in a different folder, just because you might be navigated in a different folder from there. The one that we are in is inside of the root folder. That's what the squiggly is your root folder. That's where all of your folders are all located at, is inside of a root folder. So if I want to go into, like, let's say a desktop folder, what is the command to go into that directory?
cd.
Yeah.
CD change directory.
Yes, CD or change directory. And then this is a little trick that I'll show you. So if you just press 3 letters Like for example, I want to go to desktop, but I just type in des, so DES. You can do something called tab completion inside of iTerm. So you press tab, that will go ahead and try to match it as best as possible. And I usually do 3 letters because if you just do D and then do a tab, it doesn't know if you're meeting desktop, document, or downloads, right? So you need to give a little bit more information of which folder it is. So that way it can try to auto-complete what it is that you're trying to do. So again, just do 3 letters of a particular folder, and then you can do tab, and that will complete it for you. So let's go ahead and CD into your desktop. So here inside of the desktop, we are going to create a new folder or create a new directory. What is the command for that?
Is it touch?
Close. So touch actually we're using later to create files, but in this case, I want to do a folder.
Make directory, mk-r.
Yeah. So you can think of it as make dir or make directory. So that is how you are able to create additional folders. And then this is where your folder name will be at. We'll just call it DPL Summer 22. Just because I have multiple DPL folders, and we'll just list it here for the summer cohort here. So let's go ahead and create a directory inside of our desktop of our DPL Summer 22 here. So that's the make dir command. So now let's go ahead and go into that directory. And again, to go into that directory is to change directory, which is CD and DPL. And then you could do summer, and then you can also tab complete it. So I'm just pressing tab here, and that will auto complete what it is that I'm doing. Okay, so now inside of this folder, this is where we'll have other folders for our projects as well as for our lectures. So this is where all of your stuff will be in. So let's actually create a new folder again. And to do that, we are doing make dir. And we are going to call it our lesson for today, which is just Ruby Fun, for short for Ruby Fundamentals. And when you are creating folder names, make sure you have, if it's multiple words, you have a connection. So that's either a dash or a underscore, just because if you do this, that will create 2 folders, one called Ruby and another one called Fun. So that's why we usually connect the 2 words together, either by doing it like when they're squished together or an underscore or a dash. So that's what we are going to be doing here. Sweet. So if I want to go out a directory, what is that command?
Change directory in 2 dots.
Yep. So if you want to go out a directory, like let's say I am currently inside of my DPL Summer, I need to go out a directory into desktop. You just need to do a CD. Make sure you have a space and then a dot dot. So CD space dot dot. So that's how you go out a directory. So then let's go back into our DPL Summer. I'm actually going to do something called Command R, and that will clear out the screen. But you can kind of see everything else up top if you scroll up. So you can do it with Command R. That's the shortcut, or you can type in clear. That does the exact same thing. So clear and then Command R. So yeah, let's go ahead and CD into our DPL folder. And then inside of here, let's also CD into our Ruby folder like so. So you can actually CD multiple levels.
Would you mind to go up a little bit?
Yep. Everything that I have is also inside of Slack as well. So now inside of here, we are going to create a Ruby file. And what is the command to create files?
Touch.
Yep. That one is touch. The name of the file, we'll just call this Ruby day one. And then for a Ruby file, do you know what file extension it is?
The RB, I think.
Yeah, RB. So with the file extension, every single file would need to have a file extension to kind of distinguish of what it is or what type of file it is. So HTML will have HTML, JavaScript will have JS, CSS will have CSS, and it's nothing new actually, because if you go ahead and look at pictures, they have like PNG, JPEG, GIFs, and also with other documents, you have dot dot, you also have dot x, dot text, as well as the PDF. So those are just file extensions, and coding is also using file extension as well. So each coding language will have their own file extension, and for Ruby is actually RB here. So that will go ahead and create for us a file here. So if I do a list, that will create, it will list out all of the files inside of this directory, and that is a particular file here.
Question.
So here, yeah, go ahead.
So I saw you, when you type, you go to different file, you always have the slash. I don't know how to call that. If I don't put that in, does that make any difference?
Yeah, so with this one here, if you don't have a slash, it'll still try to find it. It's just that inside of your command line or your terminal, it knows that folders will have slashes in front of it. So it might give it to you already. So regardless of if you have it or not, it will still work.
Thank you.
Yep. Sweet. So for this next part, let me see here. What I am going to have you all do is that we need to change a few of the settings here. So iTerm can be a little bit more customizable for you all. So we'll just take a quick second to kind of work through that, and then we'll go back into Ruby in a sec. So inside of your iTerm, on the top left-hand side is way up here right by the apple. It will say iTerm2 or iTerm. Yeah, it will say iTerm2. And up here, where we want to go is inside of iTerm2, we want to go to preferences. So iTerm2 and then preferences. So yeah, so then that will pop up this little preference box here. So iTerm2 preferences is on the top left-hand side. And this is for customizing your terminal here. So my terminal and your terminal might look a little bit different, and this is one of the reasons why. So let me kind of show you one of the stuff that you can do with it. So instead of appearance, you can have different themes here if you want. So you can go ahead and kind of customize it by the theme, and then you can kind of take a look at some of these options if you want to have those options. I just keep it to default and just have a dark theme. So that's what I use there. What we are going to do here, we'll have everyone go into this section here, a profile. And here under the generals tab, so make sure you have generals tab selected. And down here inside of the working directory, make sure you have this checked off, reuse previous session directory. So this one checked off. So I think by default it does home directory, but we actually want this one here. What this does is that when I want to create a new tab or a new window or anything like that, it should create it from where I am in the directory of. It shouldn't take me all the way back to the home directory and then I have to go all the way back forward. It should just take and create whatever folder I'm in and create another version of that folder. So that's what this will allow us to do. So we're using that there. For this next few items, it's really up to you if you want to change it, or you can change it to however you see fit. But I would kind of take a look at it to see if you do want to change anything there. So here inside of the colors, you can kind of change some of the colors that you see inside of your terminal. But the main ones that you are going to be changing is inside of the window here. So inside of the window, you can kind of make it more transparent. But don't make it too transparent, then you can't see anything. I just make it a little transparent here. You can blur it super, or you can make it super transparent there. I like to do somewhere in between. And then you can also have a background image, but also be careful with some background image. It could be a little bit distracting with that. So you can kind of play around with some of these settings here. And then with the terminal, that one should be okay. And then you can have like more functionality with the other keyboard keys here if you want to have more like keyboard shortcuts. But we'll kind of go into more shortcuts. The main ones is that you may want to customize it a bit. So you may want to change the window or the colors of what it is that you want to have. So that's why mine looks slightly different than yours, just because I just played around with some of these settings. So feel free to do that as well. So you can kind of make it more better for yourself, but for sure have this one inside of the generals tab there. Okay, so yeah, so that's a little bit of customizing iTerm there. You can't really do that within your terminal without installing a bunch of other stuff from third parties. So that's why iTerm kind of has that already built in. Sweet. So next part is that we are actually going to do something called code, and then there's going to be a space and then a dot. So code space dot. So what code space dot is that it will take your current directory and it will cd into that current directory and open that directory into VS Code. And it will have whatever it is that you have inside of that directory already loaded up here. So again, that is just code space dot, and that will open up that directory that you are currently in inside of VS Code. If yours isn't working, let me know during break, and then I'll kind of help you out with that, just because that would be something we did yesterday. There might be something wrong with that from yesterday. So yeah, so this is how we can go ahead and open up into our VS Code. Instead of having inside of our VS Code, we do a file search and then search it up. That's the alternative. This is slightly faster from there. Awesome. Sweet. So now we can go a little bit more into our lecture. We are going to be talking about Ruby and more of the fundamentals and everything like that. So with Ruby, it actually was invented way back in the mid 1990s, like around 1995. And it was kind of grabbing all of the good things from other languages like Plural, Smalltalk, Eiffel, IDA, and Lisp, and they threw it all together in a much more readable format and called Ruby. Does anyone know the creator of Ruby, what his name is? Any guesses, or is it okay if you don't know?
Yukihiro Matsumoto.
Yep, Yukihiro Matsumoto. I think you may have saw my tab here. But yeah, so Yukihiro Matsumoto, he is the creator of Ruby. And with this, he also goes by Mats. And he created the language to kind of fulfill the need of the individual technology that was needed at the time. And he actually visits Utah every now and then, so you may see him around, especially at meetups and other events with Ruby. And he's very sociable and willing to help you out with a lot of things there. One of the main things that he's mostly known for is something called Mina Swan. So Mina Swan is actually an acronym, and it stands for Mats is nice, so we are nice. And what that essentially means is that when he created Ruby, he didn't want just only a selected few to use it or only have him use it. He wants to have this to be a community effort. So that means that this is all open source, means that anyone can have access to it, anyone can use it, anyone can update and edit it. That's what Ruby gives us access to, is that huge community around that. And with that open sourceness, there are going to be a lot of documentations that we can reference and a lot of other stuff that we can use as well. So that's kind of the main things with Ruby, and why we are using Ruby is because of the open sourceness of what it is that we are going to be doing. So yeah, you'll definitely be seeing a lot of Ruby around as well. So for lecture, this is just to let you all know, some of the lectures may seem a little bit going at a faster pace, or I might go over a lot of things in a little bit of time. That's just to get information out there. Later on, we are going to compile some of that information and put it into a live environment or a working project. So yes, that you may be confused during lecture, or you may not understand some of the stuff that I am teaching you. That's totally okay. Your other classmates will feel the exact same way. I don't expect you to learn or know everything as soon as I teach it for you all. It's not until you kind of go over it and kind of build projects and we are going to take a look at it over and over again. That's where it will slowly sink in and it will slowly start to make sense. So the stuff that I teach to you this week will not make sense until next week or the week after. So that's just a kind of a like a heads up for you all. So yes, it is going to be a little bit confusing and a lot of stuff, but it will slowly start to make sense the more that we are going to be using it. Also, I will have everything be slacked out, recorded, as well as inside of Neo. So you don't have to type with me if you don't want to. Everything will be slacked out. So make sure you have your Slack in handy. The main thing about this is kind of the we do portion is that you kind of know what it is that I'm trying to do and try to understand what is trying to go on there. So that's kind of the main gist of lecture. So the main thing is not to keep up with me. It's more of like understanding or learning from what it is I'm doing. So that's kind of the thing there. So it's okay if you don't type along with me. Just try to know what things are and how things are coming in here. Okay.
Question.
Yes.
Do we need to install a couple things for the CV SV code, like prettier things like that? I saw you have that.
I do have some of the stuff, but just to start off, we won't have anything yet. Later on, when next week, I'll have you install a few other things.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So yeah, so let's go ahead and get started with some Ruby items. And I'm just going to go through some Ruby items here. And again, it will make sense a little bit later on. Some of them will make sense, most of them won't. So that's totally fine. So the first thing that we are going to be talking about is data as well as data types. And one of the things is within Ruby, you can go ahead and comment things out with the octathor or the pound sign or the hashtag, whatever you want to call it. That's how you comment things out, is to put that symbol in front of what you want commented out. Inside of VS Code, if whatever you want to highlight, so let's say that if you highlight this data type word, you can do command question mark, and that will comment and uncomment things out. So that's what I will be doing for some of these. If you see a bunch of code be commented out, I just highlight them and do a command question mark to kind of comment things out. So essentially what data is inside of computer science, we want to represent items inside of the real world, but inside of our virtual world, inside of our machines. So that's what data is that we all have a lot of different types of data to represent a lot of real life things. So for example, a user data is just to represent a data or what the user information has, like first name, last name, age. That's what data will have on that user. Same with other items like a car. Well, a car has like car, make, model, color, year. House would have one, things like that. So when I'm talking about data, it's just a virtual representation of something in real life. And with that, some of the items are better represented on a computer with some data types. So for example, inside of your computer, it's a little bit easier to kind of separate things depending on the types of data that we have. So can anyone give me an example of a data type, or if they can give me an example of an item that we should represent in real life. So I'll kind of start off. One of them is going to be a string. That will be with a double quote or a single quote. This is to represent words or a multiple words. So I can have hello here. So that is type string. Who has another one?
A number?
Yeah, a number. So here, well, there's actually multiple types of numbers that we'll be dealing with. The main ones that we'll be working with is integers. That is any whole number, positive or negative. So whole numbers, I'll just do positive, 0, and negative. So that what that will look like is just this, negative 32. Those are all considered integers. So that's one type of data is a integer, which represent whole numbers. Does anyone know what it's called when I have a decimal number? Like what happens when I have like this? Or even this?
Is it a Boolean?
Not a
No, it's float or yeah.
Yeah, it is a float. So a float is any number that has decimals, And the decimals could be however big or small, as long as it has a decimal is called a floating point. And you can have multiple items to be a float here. So if it has a decimal, that is considered a float. So integers are whole numbers, floats are just decimal numbers. The next one I did heard is a Boolean. And essentially what Booleans are is true and false values, true and false. That is what a Boolean is. It's just either true or false. Where this does get a little bit confusing is that in older machines, sometimes true is also a 1, false is also a 0. So that is more binary. So binary is just using 1s and 0s. So that's why 1 can also represent true and 0 can also represent false. But for now, we'll just be using true and false, and integers are going to be using 1s and 0s there. So those are Boolean. It's just any true or false values. The other thing is that with the power symbol, I don't have anything that has the power symbol around me. I have one on my computer, but my computer is huge. Sometimes it has like that 1 and then the 0 on top of it or upside down or on the bottom of it. That means that is a Boolean value. So either it turns on or off, so true or false. What other data types do you know?
Maybe null or nil.
Yeah. So in Ruby, we have something called nil. So 0 is what that means in our world is that it doesn't have a particular value. But inside of the coding world, 0 is actually an integer, and it can also mean a lot of other things. So instead of having 0 to represent what has no value, we have something called nil. And that one is what we have for no value here. So if something is nil, and this is more for errors, you'll see this a lot inside of errors. If something is nil, that means that it doesn't have value or there is no value assigned to it. Yeah. What other data types do you all know? Yeah, I saw one that is called objects. We'll talk about objects in 2 cases. The object for the data type is going to be called a hash. So sometimes hashes are also called objects. And I'll kind of tell you more why next week, so it's less confusing. Essentially what a hash is just key value pairs. So this is key value pairs. So it will have curly braces. So that's one of the things with hashes is with a curly brace. And this will have a key like so, and then a value afterwards. So a key would be whatever that property is. So for example, first name, that is a key. A value would be what is their first name. That would be like Bob in a string. So that is the hashes, is that they'll have key value pairs. And if you have multiple, then it will be separated by comma. So age is the integer. So let's say that they're 27, for example. The other one I saw is going to be arrays. That one is pretty similar. And this one is a collection of objects. And again, I'll explain what objects are in a sec. But what an array will look like is that it will go ahead and have box brackets. So hashes have curly braces or mustache brackets. That's the one right next to the P, but you have to press shift on. The box brackets are for arrays. And this one is where you want to store items. And again, they are with box brackets. So here we would have a bunch of elements within this array. So let's say that we'll have one of colors. So it'll be red, blue, green, like so. So that is an array. Inside of Ruby, it is really special of where it doesn't really care what is inside of the array. So technically this is an array of all strings, but Ruby, it doesn't care. You can have an array of string as well as other data types within it. So you can have one with integers and even other arrays and floats and everything there as well. So it really doesn't matter what type of items you have in the array. Ruby is able to go ahead and accept all of those values here. Okay, so those are the main ones that you'll be working with. There is one more that is a little bit weird. That one is going to be a date / time. I'll just do a date time. That one will give you the time of day or the time it is that you are working with. That's more of something that we'll be working a lot in Rails, but we won't be creating our own dates or times usually when we are working on stuff. But these ones, there are something that we'll be using a lot of, like strings, integers, floats, booleans, hashes, and arrays. Something with errors, one of them was already mentioned is nil. That one is going to be no value. We also have a few more. One of them is non, which is not a number. This one will show up during calculation errors. So when you try to add a number with a letter, it is technically not a number. So that's why it will give you this error. The other one is called undefined. That one is another technical data type that you will be encountering as well. What this means is that it's very self-explanatory. It means that it hasn't been created yet, or it doesn't know what it is that you're talking about. So has not been created. So if you have something that is undefined, that means that you haven't worked with it before, or you may have misspelled it. Right, so these are something that you'll definitely see a lot with errors messages, is if you see a nil, undefined, and other stuff there. Sweet, so those are data types. Let me do this next portion and then I'll slack everything out. One of the things is that when we are creating data, we like to call the data objects. So essentially that's how we are explaining what type it is or what object it is. And just think of an object as a noun, a person, place, or a thing, right? So that's essentially what we mean when we talk about objects. So when I want to create a user object is whatever that user has. So user has an email, it has a password. And then if you want to do like a account object, account has like a savings account as well as a balance and other items. So that's what we'll be doing, is that we'll be creating objects with some of these data types here, right? So a good thing to represent balance is probably a float. Good thing to represent names is probably a string. So we can go ahead and cherry pick some of these data types to create some nouns that we need inside of our project. And I'll kind of show you some of the ways that we can do that. The most common ways that we'll be doing that is with hashes, with classes, and then something else. This will make more sense, is called a table. That will make more sense later on next week when we talk about databases. But the most common way that we'll be creating objects is with hashes, with key value pairs. So here, this is technically a person object that we are creating. So this person, first name is Bob. Their age is 27, and that represents a particular person object that we are dealing with. So that is objects. We'll be using that term a lot. And Ruby itself is a object-oriented program, as well as JavaScript as well. That just means that we'll be dealing with a lot of objects and creating a lot of objects and manipulating those objects there. So what I mean by that is that we'll be creating a person's object and grabbing someone's first name, someone's age, someone's last name, someone's address. And then they have access to edit those, like they can edit their address, and they also will have access to delete some of their information if needed as well. So that's what we are going to be doing. Is it's called OOP, or object-oriented programming. Okay, so let me go ahead and Slack out what I have so far. And then you can put this inside of your notes as well. Sweet. Awesome. Let's go into, let me see. Let's kind of get started with the next topic, and then we'll talk about a little bit more about it. And then we'll take a quick break. Because I don't want to confuse you now. If you're already confused, that's totally fine. It's totally normal of what it is that you are all feeling. So the next topic that I want to talk about with you all is going to be about variables. And essentially, variables is a place for us to reference some of our data. So reference our data. So we'll be creating variables to go ahead and kind of create certain references for us to use later on. So for us to use later on. And with these variables, there are some rules that we need to do. Because yes, we could technically do it any way that we can. But again, when we are coding, we're not coding by ourselves. We're coding with other people. So it's good to make more sense of what it is that we are coding. So first things first is that when you are creating a variable, make sure that you have a good name. So a good name for the variable. So with this, make sure that you are naming it of what it is that you are storing. So name what it is for, or what it is kind of storing here. So for example, if this is a particular variable, I will kind of bring this down here. So if I were to set this variable, a bad variable name would be X, right? So X would equal this hash, for example. That would work. It will still compile, won't give you any errors, but then it's not that descriptive. So make sure that when you are naming, it is a descriptive name of what it is. So a better name, which would be a descriptive name here. So here, instead of saying X, a better name would be like our first user. So this would be like user equals, and then that. And then with variables, it follows a particular pattern. So the pattern that it follows is that it will be the variable name, as well as the equal sign, and it's a single equal sign, and then what you want to set it to. And usually that is some sort of data that you want to send it to. So that's kind of the pattern of what it is. So that's why you see me with a variable name, the equal sign, and the whatever it is that we are trying to do there. So that's what that is doing at that particular case. And again, the equal sign here doesn't mean equality, it means assignment. So make sure that you know the difference with that is that here inside of Ruby, this equal sign means assignment. So here I am assigning the word assignment. I'm assigning user into a hash. So how that is able to be useful for us is that we can go ahead and use the name of the variable if we want to use it. So that's kind of how variables work. We're actually going to take a quick 15-minute break. When we come back from break, we'll talk a little bit more about variables and what we can do with them and how they will look like, as well as a little bit more rules of what we can are able to do with those variables there. So let's take a quick 15-minute break. We'll come back at 7:15 Mountain Time. And then we'll talk a little bit more about variables. In the meantime, let me Slack this out for you all.
Thank you.
Hello, welcome back from break. Before break, we talked a little bit about data types, as well as about Rubies and some other stuff here. But we ended up leaving off at variables. And that's what we are going to be working with next is variables. So with the variables, we are going to be working with them a lot. And with variables, they are going to have some descriptive names, as well as other stuff like inside of Ruby, if you have multiple words, connect multiple words with a underscore. So connect multiple words as underscore. So how that would work is that if I have first name, for example, as a variable name, so first name, it'll be like this. You'll see in other languages, it'll be like this. That would be something else. But in Ruby, we need to have it be underscore here. And you'll kind of see that a lot within Ruby with the file names as well as other stuff. It'll be a lot of underscore stuff there. The other thing is that we can't call it some reserved words. We can't call it reserved words. So those are words that are already taken that means something else inside of the language. So for example, any data type, like if I were to call it class, that's something else inside of Ruby. So we can't use class, we can't use nil or even type. That means something inside of our language itself. So that's why we typically avoid those words, because that won't be a good naming, just because it will go ahead and mean something else in the language. Okay, so yeah, so that is the main rules with variables. Again, that is just to reference something else that we are going to be using a little bit later on. So one of the things is, and this is where it gets a little bit confusing, is this next idea called scope. Inside of Ruby, we also have something called different variable scope. Essentially what scope is where you have access to the variable, where you have access to the variable. And in most cases, it will change depending on what type of variable it is using. So when I'm saying scope, it just means that where I'm able to use it. So I'm going to go over some of these. Again, some of them may not make sense until later on we'll use them. So it's okay that some of these are going to be confusing. Because yeah, they won't make sense until we use them a bunch of times. So the first one we'll be having, and again, these are the different types of variables we have. And the main things about what they are doing is that they'll have different scope or different places we'll have access to. So different variables. First one is going to be a constant variable, constant. This one will go ahead and start with a capital first letter. Start with a capital first letter. This one is scoped filed wide. So you can use this throughout the whole entire file. But this one is constant, means that you can't change it. Can't change. I think Ruby and other languages will allow you to change these variables, but you shouldn't. It will give you a warning. So for example, it will go ahead and like, for example, foo, this is going to be a constant variable that we are using. Constant var. The next type of variable that we are going to use a lot of is local scope, or a local variable. So this one will start with a lowercase first letter. And this one is scope within a coding block. So scoped within a coding block. What that means is that later on when we get into methods and other items, so if it has a starting or ending point, it will only be within that certain container. So for example, later on, we'll talk about if statements. So if end, and then if you have a variable here of like first name, you can only use it within this if statement, for example. So that's what the coding block means, is that if you have it within a certain block of code, then you only have access to it within that particular block of code. But that one is the one that we'll be using the most, is with the locally scoped variable there. Then we'll have a instance variable. This one will make more sense next week. So instance variable. This one will start with the @ sign. So start with @ symbol. And then this one is scoped to a class or a running instance. And again, that will make a lot more sense next week when we talk about classes as well as what instance is. So how that would work is that if we are working inside of a class that is called a person, for example, then I only have access to this inside of this particular class. So at age is equal to whatever they have for their age. So that is what that means. And this, again, will make a lot more sense next week when we go into more classes and what running instances. So that is a instance variable. It starts with the @ symbol. We also have a class variable as well. This one will start with 2 @ symbols. And the scope of this one is going to be used within a class as well as within a file-wide scope. So that one is just like this. So this would be like balance goes like that. So that's how that would look like. We would use this here and there, but the most common ones are the ones above here. Is the local and the instance. We'll use constant every now and then, and this one is very rare. The next one is something that we don't use. So don't use this next one. And this one is going to be global. The reason why we're not going to use this is because of its scope. So this one will start with the money sign. And this one, the scope is throughout your whole entire machine. Scope through out your whole machine. What that will look like is like this. User is like whatever the username is, like so. So that's why those are technically shouldn't be used at all, because it's really dangerous, because you shouldn't be creating global variables, because then they can get access anywhere within your computer. So you'll see this here and there when you are Googling stuff with Ruby with the money sign. And if you ever see those, don't use them because of their scope, because they're scoped throughout your whole entire system or your whole entire machine. And we don't really do those. So we'll most likely be using your local and instant variables of what we'll be having. So let me kind of give you an example of how this would work. So you can kind of see how the different scoping works. And then later on, again, we'll go over it more and more. So it'll start to click more and more as well. So I'm going to create 3 different variables with 3 different types of scope. So this one will be equal to 1. This one is a constant variable. This one is a local variable. This one is a instance variable. And I am just setting them to 1, 2, and 3 respectively. So if I were to use them right now, I'm just going to do a puts, which will display what it is I want to display. In this case, I want to display each of the variables. So I'll do a puts, the constant, the local, and also the instance of it. Let me make sure everything else is commented out, and it is. So with this, I am going to run my particular code. Does anyone remember what command it is to run a Ruby code, a Ruby file? So to run a Ruby file, it will be with the keyword Ruby and then whatever the file name is. So it'll be Ruby, in this case, is called Ruby day 1. And that will go ahead and run the Ruby file like so. So now, because everything is all in the same scope, it will all work like normal. But when I try to use them in another location, and we'll talk about this in a later sense, but if we go ahead and put this inside of a method, calling it print foo, for example, and we'll talk about what def is and end and all that. Now, if I were to do it this way, some of these variables will work, others will not work because of their scope. Because I have this within a particular method, I have access to some of them because it has a good scope. Others, I don't have access because that is not a working scope or how we are able to access it. So if I were to go ahead and run this again, and I also need to call my method real quick. Let me do that again here. So here it will go ahead and print out 1, which it did. So the constant scope will go ahead and be file wide. So I can use that within all of my items, but I just can't really change it. But if I go into the next one, which is this foo here, I get this error. And this is what an error will look like inside of Ruby. So here is where the error is. Is this what is being highlighted? So over here, this will tell you what line of code is the error occurring at. So here it is this file, which is Ruby day 1, the RB. So this file right here. And it is around line 89 of where this is working, of where this is not working, I mean. So around 89, when I'm trying to do puts foo, then that is where we are getting our error. So this also mentions the method, and then this is what the error is. So the error is undefined local variable or method name foo, and it is a naming error. So that means that we either have something that we are using incorrectly, like we have the wrong scope, or we are spelling it incorrectly. So that means that we are taking a look at line 89 here. And around line 89, I'm using foo here. And anytime that we get this error, double check the spelling. So here, if I want to mention this one, that and that should match. So in this case, the name isn't the issue here. So they mean the exact same thing. So the other thing is that it also knows that it is an undefined local variable. So that means that we might be needing to change the scope. So you can change the scope here, or for this to work, we need to have this, and I'll comment this out, inside of this method. Because of the way that the locally variable works is that you can't use them outside of a coding block. You have to use it within the same coding block here. So if I were to move that down here and then rerun my code, then it will work like normal. And then with the instance variable, you can use it within a particular method, or you can use it outside of the method as well. So that's a little bit of what you are going to be encountering, especially with errors, is that this will tell you where the error is at and kind of a guess of what it is. So anytime you see like a undefined local variable name or method, make sure that you double check the name as well as to double check the scope. So in this case, it was a scoping issue. Go ahead, Anna, or not Anna, Brian.
So just to clarify, when we call out a variable or when we name a variable, just by the syntax that you put it in there, so because it's a lowercase first letter, that makes it a local variable, and then and where you did the capital first letter, then that makes it a document-wide variable, so is what you're saying.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, so that will define the scope of what type of variable it is, depending on what type of syntax it is that we use. So okay, yeah, so you're most likely going to be using these two because of their scope. The reason why we don't use this capital F here is that if I were to change this, and you can change it by reassignment. How that works is that you can go ahead and create that same variable, and then you can assign it to something else. So let's reassign this to 9 now. So if I were to do that here, it will let me, but it will give me this warning here, like so. So it says dynamic constant assignment. So this is technically an error because you are changing something that shouldn't be changed. So with a constant variable, it should be constant. It means that you shouldn't change it. So those are just dead set values. So this one, it will kind of work, but you shouldn't be doing it like that. So that's why constants are really good for very file-wide variables that you aren't changing. But these ones, you are able to change like so. So if I were to change foo to be equal to 4, now that would work like normal. So that is assignment as well as scope too. Sweet. So let me go ahead and send this out for you all. Like so. And then if you want to run it, just uncomment it and run a Ruby, and then the file name in this case is called Ruby day 1 with the file extension. So that's how you are going to be running the program if you want to run it as well.
Would you please explain it, the third example of the instant one?
Yes.
There's some code there, I see.
Yes, let's talk about the instance variable. Yeah, so with the instance variable, we'll go ahead and look at the definition real quick. So an instance variable, you know that it is an instance variable with the @ symbol. So if it starts with a @ symbol, it will be an instance variable. And this one is scoped within a class or a running instance. So that means that if you have a class like so, then you can only use it within that class. So that means that if I have another class of, let's say, a car, and if I were to use this age again, it won't allow me because this one is only scoped within here. This one is, it can't reference the same one because it's not the same scope. So that's the class scope, and what that means is that you can only use it within a class like so. The running instance is something that I'll explain next week because that won't make sense right now if I did explain it actually. So yeah, we'll come back to this next week. That is a good question. Okay, so yeah, those are our variables. And again, they're really good at storing information that we are going to be using. And you can do a lot with variables. You can reassign them and everything like that. So let me kind of go over a few other stuff that we will be doing. And then we'll talk about methods, which is what this one is. So inside of Ruby, when we are working with numbers, the algebra is the exact same. So if you are to add numbers, subtract, multiply, divide, that is the exact same of how you think that it will work. Like that's no changing of how that would work there. Same with parentheses. It follows the PEMAs. So it does parentheses, exponents, multiplication, addition, subtraction, and division there. So it follows the order of operation if you were to do some of those calculations. And with coding, you don't need to know a lot about math. You just need to know simple algebra, which is adding, subtracting, and all that. Give me 1 sec. I need to grab my charger. Should grab this earlier, but it's fine. So yeah, so that's something that we'll be seeing a lot of, but some of the stuff may need some calculations, other stuff may not. Something that is a little bit different with this is the type of number it is that you are using. So let me kind of show you what I mean by that. Is that if we were to do an integer division versus a float division, we might see some different results because of those different data types. Give me 1 sec to plug in There we go. Okay. Yeah, always have your charger handy because some of the stuff that we'll be doing, it will drain your battery here and there with that. So what I was saying is that if you were to do some calculations with a integer or a float, you would have different changes depending on what it is that you're working in. Let me show you what I mean by that. So if you were to go ahead, and I'll go ahead and display this, and these are the same calculations. It's just one of them will work as expected. The other does something a little bit different. So if I were to do, let me see, 1 divided by 2 versus 1 as a float divided by 2 as a float, right? So what do you think the results is for this calculation? Any guesses?
Well, since your answer will be a float, or should be, then it won't work on the first one. Because you're
Yes.
doing,
So I think we should get something like 0.5 for both of them, right? So that's kind of what we are guessing. So let's see if that's the case. Let me go ahead and run this. So we actually get 0 for the first one. And what the first one is that we did an integer 1 divided by 2. And then for the second one, it actually does give us a 0.5. So if you are dealing with decimals, then you should use a float because it'll give you more accurate results. If you were to use an integer, it will give you inaccurate results of what it technically is doing. So what it's doing here is that it does do the calculation. So because this is an integer, it does something called integer division. I'll just do integer division. And what this will do is that it will make the calculation and it will chop off whatever is in the decimal. So it's called truncate. Yeah, truncate the decimal. So what that means is that whatever is on the decimal, it'll cut off, and it doesn't round or anything. So that's why in 0.5, it is just 0 because it just chops off that particular 0.5 there. So it really doesn't care if it's like a 0.9 or a point whatever. It doesn't round. It just avoids it and turns it into an integer. So that's what we have there. And we shouldn't mismatch some of the data types because you may have one could be an integer or another one will be a float. So it's good to have whatever calculation you're doing to be a particular same data type of what that would be there. So that's something to note, is that when you are dealing with integers, you might not get an accurate result, especially with division. There is another type of calculation. That is with this percent sign. Does anyone know what this does inside of our coding? Or any guesses?
I saw that in EJS.
Yeah. Do you know what it does or what it's called?
That's module, I think.
Yeah, so that's one of the names. The other one is called modulus. That is a more common name. So what this will do is that it will give you the remainder. Give you a remainder. So we'll be using this a lot, especially if we were to try to see if something is odd or even. So for example, to use this, it is if whatever number, like let's say 2 modulus 2 is equal to 0, then that will give us a true or false. So what this will do is that this does 2 calculations in one technically. So it does 2 divided by 2, and then it will return the remainder. So remainder of 0. Right. So that's what that modulus will do. It's like it will divide it and then it will return the remainder amount that you are using. In this case, this will be a true value because 0 is equal to 0. And that's how we are checking if things are even. So you can do this to check for even. And if you want to check for odd, then you can do not equal to 0. And we'll talk about those symbols as well. But modulus is a calculation symbol that we'll be using. So with what I have here, we have 1 equal sign, which means assignment. 2, which is equality. So this will mean equal, but this one will only mean equal in value. This one is more accurate of value and data type, of value and data type. And that will depend on the language it is that you're working with. I know JavaScript, this one will hold true. This one in Ruby, it may work, it may not work, depending on certain scenarios. So what that means is that if I were to have 3 here, equals to 3 here, this would be false because the data type as well as the value is the same, but the data type is different. But if I were to do the same thing here, but with 1 equal sign, or 2 equal signs, this could give you a true value. So that is with what you see there. We also have not equal in value, so not equal in value, and then not equal in value and type. This one usually means not or opposite. So anytime that you see the bang, I call it bang, you can call it exclamation point. That one means that it is not or opposite. You also have these ones as well. These are your logical operators. So you have and, that's how you say and. That's the ampersands. That one is above the number 7. So we'll be using that a lot, especially with your conditionals as well as your loops. We also have or, which is the 2 pipes. That one is above your return key. It's a straight up and down one, and you have to press shift to get that. So that one will mean or. So we'll be seeing some of those around as well inside of our cases. But yeah, so most of those, they should be pretty self-explanatory, especially with the multiplications and all that. But some of these, they will come up here and there, especially if you are doing calculations or comparisons there. One thing I do want to talk about is that you can technically, and this will only work with the plus operator, you can do something like this. So with this, I am going to call this one string concatenation. So what string concatenation is that the plus sign, it can be used with other strings. And again, strings are just what is inside of a particular either double quote or single quotes. It really doesn't matter as long as you have one matching, like this one is matching that one is fine. But if you have something like this, like one single quote and one double quote, that will give you errors. So make sure that whatever you have your individual opening and closing quotes. I'll be using double quotes, but you'll see me flip-flop around. Just note that they're interchangeable. It really doesn't matter if you use single or double. There are some times of if you are to use some of the words like can't, that would be better if you were to use a double quote, because if you were to use a single quote, it will actually stop the string and then the T is on its own. So that's why for these types of words, you would need to have a double quote there. But going back to this, what's string concatenation? What you can do is that with the plus operator, you can go ahead and concatenate, or what this means is to create a bigger string, and you just need to put one string with another string. So in this case, I am going to do hello world. Then you go ahead and put that, so that will display inside of my program. So what this will do is that it will take one string and smush it together to create a bigger string. So this is the result. You can also continue on the chain as well, and that will still work as well. So that's string concatenation. This will be a little bit weird if you were to add numbers after it, because it doesn't do a string with a integer. So that's why try not to do it this way, because this only works with strings. You can mix it up with other data types. So I'm just going to put a note here of this is an error. Error, since it only works with strings. So that is string concatenation. Sweet. Okay, so let me go ahead and select this out.
Could you quote your integer and then it would work?
Yeah, let's try that. So what he mentioned is that what happens if we were to go ahead and instead of having this be a integer, we'll have it be a string. So if we go ahead and run that, that would work. So yeah, so if it is in a string, this one is not an error because it does work with other strings. It's just that this one does give you an error because this is it is a different type of data type. It only works with string. That's why it's called string concatenation. Good question. So let me go ahead and select this out for you all. And then I am going to continue on with methods. Yeah, this will make more sense when we start to use some of these. So it's okay if you are a little bit confused with some of the stuff here. And I am jumping around here and there just because there's a lot of stuff, but later on we'll kind of cherry pick things to put things all in a single program. So the next topic that we are going to be working with is called methods. Sometimes you'll hear this be called functions. They mean the exact same thing. Essentially what a method is that instead of writing our code in a whole entire file, we are breaking up our code into small manageable parts. Small manageable parts. And with the method, it follows the same naming convention as a variable. So follows same naming as a variable. So that means you can't call it like X, maybe descriptive. You also can't call it a particular reserved word, and you can connect most of the stuff with an underscore. So that's what that means there. With methods, how they look like is that they will start with a DEF with the method name, and then they would have a end. If you don't have a end, this is what it will give you. So if you ever see this error here, syntax error, unexpected end of input, you'll see this a lot. What this means is that around this area, you have something that you are not ending, or you have one-to-many ends. So if you ever see this error here, that just means you need to check and close out your end or have one too many. So in this case, I don't have enough. So that's what that will look like there. So there's that type of method. There's also another one where you are going to be passing in parameters. So how that one will look like is that it will follow the exact same thing, but inside of here, inside of a parentheses, you can pass in something called arguments or parameters. So what this one is that you are passing in arguments or parameters to the method to use. Let me show you what I mean by that in a sec. So if I were to use them, then with the method, I would call the method by the name. So to use the method, or to run the code within the method, we just call it by the name. We just call it by the name. And if it has parameters, we need to pass in the parameters. And if it has params, then pass in the params. Let me kind of give you a live example of what I mean by that. So let me go ahead and create two methods, one without a parameter, another one where we are going to print a parameter. So to create a method, it'll be def print hello world, for example. And this one, I'll just go ahead and do a puts hello world. So if I want to run this code, because right now, if I go ahead and run this, nothing will work. Methods can only work if you call it by the name. So if I were to call it by the name like so of print hello world, then it will go ahead and go back to the method and it will run that code of saying hello world here. So that's how that type of method works. Let me make a slight alteration inside of here to show you what the other one is. So this one will say hello planet, for example. Planet. This one, I am going to pass in something called a planet. So with this, what we are going to do is that if it's this type of method, I can't just call it by the name. Because if you call it by the name, you'll get this error. And what this error is that it's the wrong number of arguments. That means that you need to pass in the right amount of arguments or you pass in way too many arguments. So if you ever see this type of error, that means that you need to pass in the right amount or you have too much. So here, I'm not passing in any arguments. So to pass in an argument, let's go ahead and pass in a string of a planet. Let's do Mars, for example. And let me kind of change this so this will work. So how this will work is that with this will be treated like a local variable. So with the params, I'll put this as notes. With the params or arguments, it is treated like a local variable. So here, if I go ahead and call planet here, it will go ahead and see what that is going to be stored as. So here, Mars is going to be our planet. So then when I go ahead and run this code, it'll say hello Mars. And now let's give it some spacing there, like so. So that's how this type of method works, is that we'll go ahead and give it some arguments so that way we can use it within our particular method. And it is treated like a local variable because you can only use this planet word inside of this particular method. I can't just do like a puts planet here again, because then I will be out of scope. So that's what arguments and methods are, is that particular kind of items here.
Question.
Yes.
Can you put two, you said argument or parameter? Like, what is the difference between argument and parameters? First question. Sorry.
Nothing. They're the exact same. You can.
Oh, they're the same. Okay.
Yep.
Can I put two then?
Yes. So let's say we'll do greeting. We'll do greeting. And then we'll do planet. So this one will be our greeting and our planet. So if you have multiple arguments, this is something good to know as well. So if you do have multiple arguments, order does matter. Order does matter. What I mean by that is that the first argument will always be the greeting. The second one will always be the planet. So for example, if I were to go ahead and do hello here, this will represent the greeting. And then this will represent the planet always. So then if I go ahead and run my code, it will say hello Mars like so. Or I can say greeting like so. So if you have multiple, it will just be separated by a comma. But just note that if you do have multiple, order does matter. It's just whatever is in this argument will be the greeting, and this argument will be the planet. And then you can continue on with that path. That's a good question.
Sorry, I have, and I see the greeting and more there have the quote. Is that has to be a string?
No, it could be whatever data type, for example. So let's do another one of age. Let's go ahead and pass in like 8.
Oh, okay. So you're putting the variable of
Yeah.
the parameter. Okay.
And this will go into our next topic. So if we have another variable or if we have another type of argument here, but this message, I don't want to do continue concatenation, right? So what I mean is that this will also work is, and then I can go ahead and do age and then years old. This works, but there is a better way for us to do this. And that will go into our next topic here of our string interpolation. So essentially what string interpolation is that they only work with double quotes. And we can actually go ahead and use variables as well as arguments inside of a string. And that will kind of clean up the concatenation process here. So for example, I can go ahead and again, it only works within double quotes. So here, instead of double quotes, I can go ahead and interpolate. And how you interpolate is with the octothorpe and then the 2 curly braces. And then you can go ahead and put your variable or whatever you want to interpolate inside of here. So here it would be interpolating the greeting. And then I'll go ahead and I want it to say planet. So I'll interpolate the planet as well. And then I'll also put like a little exclamation point. That one is just for like, hello, Mars, exclamation point. You know, that's what that is there. It has nothing to do with coding. And I will go ahead and say is, and then I'll interpolate the age years old. So both ways work. This way is a little bit more cleaner than this way because you're using less symbols, but you are interpolating more from there. So you can use string concatenation or string interpolation. They'll still work the exact same way. But for the most case, we'll be using string interpolation for some of these items. Let me see. Oh, yeah, this one I can't concatenate because age is a integer. And again, you can do a string concatenation with integers here. So this is where this would be superior because interpolation really doesn't care about data types. It will go ahead and inject that in like it should there. So we'll be using string interpolation more, especially when we are creating messages, custom messages. Okay, any questions about that? Sweet. Let me go ahead and Slack this out for you all. And then what we are going to, oh, sorry. Another thing to know with methods before I forget. Where is it? So with methods, is to break a item into small manageable parts. It should also perform a single task. So perform a single task. And if you have multiple things that method is doing, you should break that up into other methods. So break up to other methods if it's too big. The next thing that you should do is that it should all return items. So that's where the return is that it will go ahead and return a particular item. But Ruby does this automatically. So the last line is always return. So that is if we are doing some calculations or some logic in there, we can return that value back to where it is that we are using it. So that's just a little bit more about methods that is a little bit tidbit that we would need to keep in mind there as well. So here is my notes. Let's go ahead and take another 15-minute break. And then when we come back from break, we'll go ahead and talk about conditionals as well as a loop.
May I ask?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, the last line you said return. Sorry, it's my second language, so I'm trying to understand it. So you said return as last line is always return. What does that even mean?
So with methods, you can go ahead and return a value like with the return here. So if I want to return something, for example, I can return the number 1. So if I call this method, that will just give us a number 1. And that's how that would work. But if I don't have that return keyword and I just have a 1 here, that last line of what I have inside of this code, that will also be returned as well. So that is what the method is giving back, is the keyword return does that for you, or whatever is on the last line. So if I have another line here of like hello, this one is return instead of this string. So yeah, that will make more sense when we make a program, because there are some methods that we do need to return some logic for sure.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yep. I think I didn't pause the recording, so make sure you skip over that 15-minute break if you are watching the video. That was my bad. So yeah, let's get back into it with the final stretch. One more thing about methods is that you can actually put call method within another method. And how that would work is that let's just say we'll just do a method called triple. What this will do is that it will go ahead and grab a number. And with this number, it'll just go ahead and use that number times it by 3. What we are also going to be doing is that we'll go ahead and see if it's odd or even. That one will also take a number. And this works. I can call these two the same thing because they have different scope. So I can only use this here, and this one I can only use inside of here. So then if num is modulus 2 equals 0, else end, then we'll go ahead and return even, or we are going to return odd. So I have 2 methods here. I can call a method within another method. How that would work is that it will just go out inside out. So if I call odd and even, and then within here, I'll call triple my a number here, and let's just do 3. And that will go ahead and do the triple method first, because that's the most inner one, takes the 3 times it by 3. And then with that, it takes that result and pass it into here for num. And then it'll check if it is odd or even. So you can call methods within other methods. Ruby also has other methods that we can use as well. So we can do like puts, like, let me see. So a good Ruby method that you'll be using a lot of, instead of me trying to come up with a random one, is that if you need to convert something into another data type. So for example, we have 2i, 2f, and then 2s. 2s is already given. So what this will do is that it will go ahead and parse or convert. I'll just say convert. That might be a better wording. Convert to a data type as best as possible. If it's not possible, it will give you an error, or it will let you know that that is not possible. So this one will convert it to an integer. This one will convert it to a float. This one will also be a string. So how this would work is that these are already predefined method that Ruby already gives you, and you can use that within your program. So for example, if I were to go ahead and do like a string of 8, but do a 2i, it'll try to convert it as best as possible to an integer. So if I go ahead and run that, it will give us the number 8. So that is for conversions, if you need to do some different conversions for those. And you'll see a lot of Ruby methods. Again, the thing is not to memorize all of them, because there are a lot of Ruby methods. Just remember the main ones, especially the ones that you use the most. And all the other ones you can always look up. Like just look up, for example, Ruby, how to convert a string to integer, for example. And then there are some good ones. I like to go to Stack Overflow, and then you always see if that is what it is trying to do. And you can do it this way as well with the integer class here that it has. So that is another way that you can do it, or you can do it this way. So those are Ruby methods. I'll show you another place where you can find all of these, or you can just Google them, and that will give you a more precise method it is that you are going to be using. So the next topic that we are going to be talking about is conditionals. Essentially what a conditional is that it will go ahead and run logic if a condition is met. So run logic based on a condition. And with the conditionals, you'll have an if, else if, but in Ruby is that, else. You'll also have a case statement, a ternary, and unless. So these are different types of conditionals. They all work the same way. So all work the same way. It just the way that they do it might be slightly different. The way they do it might be different. So what that means is that you can use an if statement and a case statement and it will still work the same way. So essentially this will go ahead and run some code based on if a condition is met. There are a few things to note before we move on with these, and that goes off of the conditions here. So when you are doing a condition, it should give you a true or false value. So give you a true or a false value. We don't want something that is always true or always false. We don't want always true or always false, because that means that this code will never run or it will always run. So when it is tautological, that means that it will always be false. We don't want it to always be false because then none of our code inside of our conditional will run. It is, forgot the term, but if it's always true, then it will always run and all of these conditions will run and all of our logic will run, even if it's not supposed to run. So that's why we need to have a true or false value or something that is contingent. So with that, we are going to go ahead and only do conditions with those set conditions. And if we have multiple, you can always do an and. And how that will work is that if both sides are true, then the whole thing is true. Then the whole thing is true. So if one condition on this side is met and this condition on this side is met, then the condition is good. If it's not, then it will not work. It won't meet the condition. The other one is or. With the or, this one is only one side needs to be met. So only one side needs to be met. So let me show you a bad example, and then I'll show you a good example, but in multiple ways. Because again, you'll see a lot in coding. There's multiple ways to do the exact same thing. Especially for conditionals, we can do the same conditional in an if, a case, a ternary, etc. Is all preference from there. So let me kind of show you a bad one. So let's say that if true, then we'll just go ahead and do puts hello. So this will always run. This line 224, this will always run because this condition is always true. That's something you don't want. So not want. So that means that this condition will always be met. So we are always printing out hello. You want something that could be true or false. So for example, if the name is equal to Bob, and again, make sure you're doing double equals or triple equals, because again, 1 equal sign means assignment. 2 equal sign or 3, that means equality. So if that is the case, if the name is equal to Bob, then I'll go ahead and do hello, Bob. Right, so let me go ahead and set the name here to be Bob. And then it will run through this logic. So if name, which is this variable right here, if that Bob is equal to this Bob, then run hello, Bob. If it's not, let's say that this isn't Bob. This is going to be Jack, for example. So let me comment that out. Then it won't run anything at all. So that's why when we are doing an if, we also need to do else as well to catch it when it's not meeting any of these conditions. So what happens when the name isn't Bob, for example? Then we'll go ahead and do puts. You are not the droids we're looking for. Right, so then it will go through all of the conditions. And if we don't have that condition, then it will hit the else. So here, if I go ahead and run it, it will go ahead and run the else. But what if we have multiple types of conditions? So what if I want to check if the name is also Jack, for example? Then you'll do something called else if. So in that case, you can do name is equal to Jack. If it is equal to Jack, then we'll do hello Jack. So that's one way that you can do it, is that you can do a else if there. So that way it will go ahead and run that logic. And if it's met, then it will go ahead and do whatever code is inside of that block. So that's what this does here. So another way that you can do that same else if, especially if it is this simple, you can do a and, for example, but this is only if this is the same exact type of input. So what I mean by that is that if and name is equal to Jack, then we'll just say hello. So that kind of simplified things. If you want it more personable, you'll do it this way. If it's just if the name is Bob and if the name is Jack, this will never work actually, because name can only be Bob or Jack. It can't be both. A better thing that we should do is or actually. And then it will say hello. Go ahead, Brian.
You just answered my question. I was confused on the and versus or. I just want to make sure that wasn't. So
Yeah.
anyway, thank you.
Yeah. So yeah, in that case, it doesn't make sense because name can only be one value. So that's why that one doesn't really help us out there. So yeah,
I have a question too.
Yep.
So can we look at the yeah, so the name at the first line 22A, the name that is a local variable, but that is not in the block. How come didn't say air?
Because right now, if I don't have it within a block, it's filed wide. But if I do have it in a block, like let's say this is our method of check name, then I can go ahead and put everything inside of this particular one here, and then call check name here. So now this one is considered a block, and now it is better scope. But if you have it outside, it will be filed wide. Yeah. But yeah, in most cases, you'll have it within a method. You would never do it outside here. But yeah, so that is conditionals. With the and, that one will make more sense if we deal with more complex objects. So for example, let me do this one here. If I were to do like a person, and this is equal to a hash of name equals, let's do Jill, and then age is 16, sure. And we can do some conditions on this here, right? So if the name, it will be person and then name. We'll talk a little bit more about this tomorrow when we talk about hashes, but this is how you can grab this value here. So we can grab the value here of Jill. If that is equal to Jill, then we'll say hello. And we'll do an and here. If the person's age, for example, is greater than 21, then we'll say, welcome to the Cool Kids Club. We'll do welcome to the Cool Kids Club. Else, we are going to put, you are not welcome here. So with this and, what this will do is that it will check both conditions. So if their name is Jill, and if that is true, then it'll check the next condition. If it's not, like let's say this is Jack, for example, then that is false, then it'll go to the else. It doesn't even do this next calculation at all. But if their name is Jill, it'll go to this next one. And if their age is greater than 21, then it will print out this message. or else it will then go into here. So you can actually chain these multiple as well. So you can do like and continuing on if you want to do it that way. And all of those will work like so. So that's how ands will work. There's more of being more specific with it. And you want the most specific thing to be on top. Sweet. So I'm actually going to do this particular if else, but now inside of a case. So let me kind of comment out this real quick. Yeah, I'll copy this and then I'll comment out this real quick. So with this, I am going to do that same thing, but in a different way. So this one is how a case statement works, and it works the exact same way, but you're just using another tool here. So here the case is that with their name, if their name is equal to when the name is equal to Bob, then we'll do puts hello Bob. And then you can also do when it is, I think I did Jack. Then it will be puts hello Jack. And then instead of a else if, we're using whens. So you can have multiple whens here. And then with the else here, that is what we'll have right here. So again, this will work the exact same way of what you see here. It's just slightly different way of writing things. With the ternary, so this is the if else, this one is a case statement. So case statement. With the ternary, it doesn't work if it's like this. Ternaries only work if you only have an if and an else. So let me kind of go through an example with that real quick. Let me see. Yeah, I'll probably just do if else Bob, like so. So let me just do this here and then just take this out. So this is more for ternaries. And essentially ternaries are just if else's in one line. And it only has only a single logic inside of that particular line. So single logic, single line logic. So that means that this works, but if I were to go ahead and do anything else and do puts hello world, then I can't convert this into a ternary because here I have multiple lines, right? So ternaries aren't really good at that. They're more for these single ones that we have here. So not best for ternary. Okay, so how a ternary will look like, and it's a little bit funky, is that if you do need to assign something, that will go at the front, and then an equal sign, the condition, and then followed by what happens with a question mark, and then followed by what happens when the if is hit, and then a colon, what happens when the else is hit. So that's kind of the formatting of a ternary. This one is optional, but this one is the required version here. So let me kind of show you this if else, but as a ternary. So following that pattern, the name is equal to Bob. And if it is equal to Bob, then I'll do puts hello Bob after the question mark. If it's not, after a colon, I'll do this puts here. So it is a cleaner one-liner for if else. And again, it should only be a if else. It doesn't work with the else if attached to it or a multiple line logic, right? So it is really good for cleaning up this type of logic here. I'm not going to go over unless because that one is super uncommon. It's just a little bit backwards of how it works. So unless this condition is met, then run the code. That's essentially how it does work. I don't want to teach that to you right now because you might get confused of how conditionals work. Just know that these conditionals, they would work when a condition is met, then it'll run some sort of logic. So that's how this will all tie in together. And we'll do a live example, so this will make a little bit more sense more tomorrow. So let me go ahead and send this out to you all, and then we'll talk about loops. Okie dokie. So the next topic is going to be loops. And loops are very similar to conditionals. They just work differently as well. So what a loop is that it will continue to run logic until a condition is met. So continue to run logic until a condition is met. And there is something I need to note for you all before we get started, just because there is something called an infinite loop, and it is as it sounds. So this is a loop that will run forever. We don't want that. So this is something you do not do. So don't follow along for this part just because this will mess you up, but I'll show you what you would do if this does happen. So an infinite loop is that if you go ahead and do something that is always true, this would be an infinite loop because this condition will always be met and it will always go ahead and run the logic inside of this loop. So I'll just put hello. So if I were to run my code right now, because this condition is always true, it will continue to print out hello forever until my computer runs out of battery or runs out of memory, etc. That's what an infinite loop is. You don't want to write infinite loops because it can really mess up your logic in your machine. So that's what it's doing right now. To get out of an infinite loop is to also get out of a program. That is with Control C. So let me kind of write that down for you. So to get out of a loop, more specific, an infinite loop, or a program, you would need to do Control, which is the one right next to the Option key, so Control. And then you also need to press C as in cat. So Control C to go ahead and get out of a program or get out an infinite loop. So make sure you know that because you may unintentionally do an infinite loop because you always have something to be true. So yeah, be careful with that. So with this, we want to prevent infinite loops. So to prevent infinite loops, we need to follow a few steps. The first step is that it's going to need a base case. What a base case is that it is a starting point. So we need to have somewhere that we are starting. Here, we don't have a starting point. Like, where are we starting here? It's just always true. There's not really a way for us to start. The other one is going to be a induction step. Induction step. This will go ahead and continue the loop forward. So continue the loop forward to the condition. To the condition. This is really important because this is how we eventually will stop. And then the last one is to have a final step or a end case or end condition. Condition that will eventually be met. Condition that will eventually be met. So let me kind of write this out for you all here. So let's say that while my number is less than, let me see. While my number is yeah, less than 5. So that is my condition, right? That is my end condition. This is what it will eventually be reached. What I am going to do is that I am going to go ahead and put my num. So this is our end condition. Let me type that out for you. Something that I need is a base case, a starting point. So my starting point or my base case is num is equal to 0. So this is my base case. So num is equal to 0. And my end condition is that when it's less than 5. Now here's the important part is the induction step. So when I am going to be printing out my num, I'm actually going to go ahead and do a plus equals 1. So this is my induction step. So this here will go ahead and add 1 into my num, and it will eventually will get out of this condition, right? So this is a way for us to get out of the condition. So eventually it will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And once it's 5, that condition is no longer met because 5 is not less than 5. So then it will be kicked out of that particular condition. And this is now a really good loop that will won't be an infinite loop because it has all of those 3 elements there. Base case, a ending condition, and a induction step. This one doesn't have any of that. That will create an infinite loop. So let me kind of run this for you all. So you can kind of see that this will print from 0 to 4. Because if we start off at 0, we add 1 to it, to another 1, another 1, another 1. And right when it hits 5, that condition is no longer being met. So that's why we stop at 4. So that is a while loop and loops in general. So be sure you have all of those different items there. So there's that type of loop. I'm going to go over all of the other loops. Again, it's just a different way to do the exact same thing. So with the loops, we have our while, we'll have until, our for, our each. And then this one is more for tomorrow. So we'll have each with map and then each with index as well. That will make a lot more sense tomorrow when we talk about different data types. Yeah. So these ones are more loops. That's more of your traditional loops. This one is more of a iterator. What that means is that it will go through a collection. So goes through a collection. I'll show you what I mean by that. Goes through a collection. But they all work the same way there. So with the while loop, we did the while loop. Yeah, let's do the next one. So another way you can do this is the until. So until works a little bit backwards. So until num is greater than 5, then do all of this here. Like so. So that's how the until is. It just works so slightly opposite. And then we'll have our for. So this one is for, let me see. We'll call this num in, and then what this will give us is a range of 0 through 5. So this means a range of 0 through 5. I think it is exclusive, so it only goes up to 5. Probably not the 5 itself. So then you can do a num here. This one you don't need a induction step because we are doing a range. So that means that we are going through 0, 1, 2, 3 for each of those. So that does the induction step for us, which is good. And then the other ones is very similar to this one where it already handles the induction step. That's the each. So we'll see a better example of this tomorrow. especially with arrays. Arrays are really good with each, as well as the next one I'm going to do. So this one will be each do, call each one of those num, then print out the num like so. And then the other one is a map. That one works only with arrays. So if you have an array of 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4, I'm going to call this array. So with my array.map, I am going to go ahead and I think I need to do this in here. I'll double check this real quick. So then I'll call this one to be num, and then I'll go ahead and put num here. So all of these will do the exact same thing as what we have up here. It's just some of these, they would handle some of the induction step for us. And it just goes through a collection. So it'll go and iterate through the collection. So these bottom ones that we just did, they will make a lot more sense later on.
Question.
Yep.
So when you put the num, there's like two, like the, yeah. Is that is built in, like means something, or what?
Yes.
Why we'll have two things there?
Yeah, so what this is that anytime that you're doing an each do, you have to do these two pipes. Again, the pipe is right above your return key. And what this is that what this number represent. You can call it whatever you want, like it could be X, that will still work, but that's not very descriptive. So let me give you this example here. This one does the exact same thing as the each here. Also with the two pipes, we're calling it num. So what this means is that for each of these items, we're calling each of them num. So that's num, that's num, that's num, and then that is num. So then 0 would be num, 1 would be num, 2 would be num, etc. So we're giving it a generic name to represent each of the items that we are going to go through. And you can call this whatever you want. It's just you should call it whatever makes sense. So I can call this pizza if I want. Then that means that this is a pizza, this is also pizza, etc. So that just represents what each of these elements are referenced as.
Thank you.
Yep, that's a good question. Sweet. There are also other ones that we are probably not going to be using as much. There is the select one, and reject and reduce. Those are more for special cases. We won't really be diving into those unless we really need to. So if you are interested, you can always look them up of what those are and what they are used for. The most common ones that we'll be using are the while loops and the map and the each that we are going to be seeing right here. Kind of continuing off of that, there are also these words here like next, break, and retry. Next, break, and retry. What these will do is that inside of a loop or even a condition, they will go through the next condition or the next line of execution. So next line of execution. I'll just do next line of code. And then the break will go ahead and leave the line of execution. So this will leave the logic. And then retry. This one will go ahead and redo the logic. Redo the logic. Let me give you some example for some of these. So for example, I'm just gonna copy and paste this from our lecture here. So here we are going to break out of this loop if X is equal to 5, right? So this will go ahead and do all of the logic, but once this condition is met, then we are no longer doing the logic anymore. We're no longer doing the while loop anymore. So that's how break works. Next is very similar as well, but it will just go through the next line of execution, and retry will go ahead and retry that code again if it is having an error, for example. So that's something that we'll use here and there, but the break is probably the one that we'll be using the most there. One more thing is that you can also use a loop within another loop and a condition within another condition. Just be careful with those, because the more you go in with nested loops, which is a loop within a loop, or a condition, or etc. You can put it one within another, multiple levels. Just know that for every single level, it's just more logic of what you are going to be doing. So for example, for this one here, let me do a loop within another loop so you can kind of see what I am doing. So let me just do 1 through 5 here, and I'll just do a dot each, reference each one of those as a number. So 1 is a number, 2 is a number, etc. And I am going to go ahead and do a puts the number. Something else that I am going to do is that I am going to have an array of A, B, and C dot each do, reference each one of these as a letter. That will reference each of these as letter, a generic way to target those elements. And then we are going to print out that letter. Oh, yeah, there we go. So for every one iteration, it will do another one of these iteration. What I mean by that is that while it goes through the 1, it will go ahead and print out 1, and then it'll say ABC. So it'll go through this loop. And then 2, ABC, 3, ABC, 4, ABC, etc. So that's what it is doing here. So the more logic that you do, it will go ahead and do the inside one as many times as you are going through the outside one. So be careful with that. It does make things a little bit more complicated. We are going to be using that a little bit later on when we are creating data. But for most of that, that would be as far as we go. We don't want to do multiple levels because it does get a little bit confusing. So those are loops. So loops are anything that is going to be running logic and continue to run that logic until a condition is met. Just note that if you ever hit a infinite loop, just do a Control C. So let me go over a few more things, and then I'll slack it out, and then we can kind of review a few things too. So let's go ahead and talk about inputs and outputs real quick. Inputs and outputs. So when we are using just Ruby, we are using the terminal or the console, using the terminal to interact with the user. So that's why you see me go back and forth from the iTerm and VS Code, because the code will run inside of the terminal itself. If I want to display something, so if you want to display, there's 3 ways to do it. You'll probably be using one of them the most. So if you want to do display, which is outputting something, then we can do a puts, a print, or P. So those are 3 ways. So the difference is that the puts will do it in a line, a new line. So display in a new line. Print will display it on the same line. So display on the same line. And the P also displays on the same line, but it also shows syntax. So shows syntax. Let me give you an example of all of them. So let me do puts hello, print hello. I'll do hi, so slightly different, and then I'll do P, hey. And I'll show you the difference from there. So then here, this prints it on a new line, and that's the one you'll be using the most is puts. And then here with hi, that one's a print, it puts it in the same line, and P also puts it in the same line, but it shows you the string. So if you have a string or an array or a hash, it'll also show those syntax as well. So yeah, so to be honest, you'll be using puts the most. P will be using more for lecture, but puts is something that you'll be using a lot of there. For inputs, this is where you are going to grab information from the user. So grab info from user. And this one is going to be with get. And how this would work is that this will prompt the user to type something. And the other thing that you should do is that you should save it to a variable, should save to a variable. So let me kind of do multiple things so you can kind of see some of these items in action, for example. And this will also show you the inputs. So let me go ahead and do a puts. Welcome to DPL. That will be our display. And then I'll do another one where I am going to ask them the name. What is your name? And then if I want to ask them the name, I am going to do a variable name here of, I'll just say name here, equals to gets. And that's how you use the inputs, is the gets here. And then it's good for us to also, should save, not to say. It's good for us to also save it to a variable so we can reference that later. So how we can reference it is to go ahead and do a puts. We'll do some string interpolation. Welcome. And then we are going to interpolate what they put in for their name to our class. So let's see this in action. So it'll run this puts, this other puts, it'll prompt the user, and then it will go ahead and take that user information into this message. So welcome to DPL. What is your name? My name is Henry. And then, oh, sorry. So this is what will prompt you. It will just go ahead and give you a little cursor here for you to type. So here I'll type in Henry. And then when I press enter, it will go ahead and do a welcome and then another one to class here. So one thing that we would do is that we need to clean up the input. So this is where our methods will come in. I am going to do something called a strip here. And what's going on is that, let me actually show you this with a P. So what p.name is. So to show you what's going on here and why it's displaying it like it is here. So if I were to type Bob, it says welcome. And then on another line, it says to our class. What's going on is that when I'm clicking the enter, it actually also captures the new line as well. So in most cases, you don't want that. So in order for us to get rid of that, there's a few ways. You can do chomp, which is getting rid of the beginning, or you can do strip, which will go ahead and get rid of the spaces on both sides. So if we do gets.strip, it will go ahead and ignore, let me put this back. It will ignore the space and only get just the text there. So if I go ahead and rerun this to Bob, now it will be on a single line instead of a new line. So that's where we can go ahead and use our custom methods of what we have there as well. So that's a little bit of inputs and outputs. We'll actually be using this a lot, especially with interacting inside of our program. The last thing is that you can also use backticks to run commands. So you can run like a ls, for example. This is where you can go ahead and kind of automate things of creating files and other things. So what this does is that when you're using the backticks, this will run shell commands. And what that is that it'll run these commands that you type inside of your terminal. So if I go ahead and run this, this will run at ls. Let me show you that again, and it will list out all of that. So that's something for you to note there. So yeah, so that's everything that we have so far with the fundamentals. Let me go ahead and Slack this out for you all, which is this link. And what this link is, I'll show you it real quick before we wrap up, is that this is where all of the Ruby methods will be in. So if you go to core, I think core, and then I think if you just do modules and classes, this is where you can learn a little bit more about like what the dot elements are and what some of the documentation is for some of those. So this is the official documentation. It's a little bit very wordy. So if that's your thing, this might be good for you. But for me, I like to Google things of like, hey, what does scope mean? And that is a better result for me to do. But this is also a good resource for you all as well. So here is your final thing for today. Tomorrow, we are going to review all of this. And again, you should be a little bit confused at this point because the more we are going to be doing this, the more it will make sense. Since this is the most of your first time looking at this, that's why it makes a little bit of sense in some parts and confusing in other parts. So it's okay to be confused. Tomorrow will be slightly better because we'll be reviewing this and kind of applying some of this to actual use cases. But yeah, if you don't have anything else, I will see you all tomorrow. Thank you.